So the next question is from Mary B., and this is from her students. What concepts are most frequent on the exam? What is the balance between conceptual questions versus skill-based questions on the multiple choice?
Could you repeat the last part of the question, Nicole?
Sure. What is the balance between conceptual questions versus skill-based questions on the multiple choice?
Okay. On the multiple choice, I think that there's a real effort to ask conceptual questions. There's no questions that, for instance, would say, here's 8 numbers, find the median, which I would call a skill-based question that we might ask, at the very beginning of the course. Most of them are conceptual, and my students will tell me that they don't use their calculator very often, especially on the multiple choice section, because, again, most of the questions tend to be conceptual. On the free response, you've probably seen more free response questions. There's a mixture of conceptual and sort of calculation or skill questions, but again, I would say that there's a definite favoritism towards conceptual questions.
The next question actually came from a few people, so I'm just going to paraphrase. How much will penmanship or sloppy handwriting affect your grade? If you have bad penmanship, will readers score you against a little bit worse?
This is Darren. I'll take that one. The answer is we will try our best. When we're at the grading, each reader has a partner, and so if the initial reader can't read the handwriting for whatever reason, they will contact their partner and ask for them to try to read it. If they're both having trouble, then we have someone else in the grading room called a table leader that they can take it to, and the table leader also has a partner. So to be truthful, if the writing is really difficult to read, we'll give it up to 4 attempts just to make sure that we're giving it a fair assessment. And at that point, if none of the 4 people can really make out what's going on, then at that point we really can't spend any more time trying to read it. So 4 attempts is as much as we are able to do, but a good effort is made to try to read each student's answer. So I guess the direct answer to the question is not beautiful handwriting shouldn't really impact the score, but illegible handwriting, so illegible that 4 people aren't able to read it, could definitely impact the score.
I'll add also that spelling doesn't count for the most part. So I know I have a student who has some issues with spelling, and I've assured her that as long as we're pretty clear what word she's trying to spell, that spelling incorrectly is not a big deal.
Don't let the English readers hear you say that. So the next question, we have about 6 left. The next question is from Melissa B. How exactly do you practice rule number 4, which distribution, effectively with your students so that they feel prepared and confident walking into the exam?
This is Josh. I would do exactly what Darren did as he was highlighting the slide, which is as you're reading a question or talking about a scenario, every time that there's mention of a distribution or of some measure of center or variability, that you stop and you say, now which one is it referring to? Okay. Another way that you could do this is to use a couple different applets that we highlight in Chapter 7, which is the sampling distribution chapter. There's one that's, we call it the Rice Online Sampling Distribution Applet. It's not produced by us, but it's really good because on the top it shows a population, on the next level it shows a sample, and then right below that it shows the sampling distribution of a statistic, typically the mean. And really showing all 3 of those distributions on the same screen and then being able to talk about it, I think really helps students begin to clarify which one is which. Darren's going to go look for it right now.
Yeah, go ahead with another question, and I'll find it here in just a second.
Okay. The next question is from Julie C. Inference on the exam. Did I hear you correctly when you said we never do a z-test for proportions?
No. We can do z-tests and z-intervals for proportions. I think the possible a correct statement might be that we don't do a z-test for a mean or a z-interval for a mean. That would only be the case if you knew the population standard deviation sigma, which is almost never the case. So definitely okay to do a z-test for a proportion or a z-test for an interval or a difference, z-test for a proportion or a z-interval for proportion or a difference in proportions. Okay. Looks like Darren's ready to demonstrate the applet.
Yeah, this is the online stat book applet for sampling distribution. You can see that the population distribution at the top is approximately normal or normal looking. And if I take a sample, it'll display the distribution of sample data here, and then it will drop after it takes a sample of size 20. It'll drop the mean down onto this next set of axes here. So if we do a bunch of those, we can get a picture of the distribution of sample mean. But I think the best part is seeing this picture with the population distribution, the distribution of sample data, and then the sampling distribution being built up of X bar.
And you can see that each of those distributions has different spreads and different shapes. Or, well, in this case, two of them have normal distribution shapes. So it's always very important that you don't ever say there'll be more variability. You need to say there'll be more variability in the distribution of blank, depending on which distribution you're talking about. So it's getting students to be precise with their language that's the real key here. All right, other questions?
The next one is from Jasmine G. What would a regular inference question that doesn't ask to interpret the p-value or confidence level look like?
So typically the confidence interval questions will start with a statement like, construct and interpret a 95% confidence interval for the mean blah, 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 or the proportion of people who blah, 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 something like that. But it's the construct and interpret that will trigger kids to do the four-step process. And when it says interpret, we're talking about interpreting the confidence interval itself, saying something like, I'm 95% confident that the interval from 2.8 to 3.9, captures the mean GPA for students at our high school or something like that. And for tests, the wording typically will say something like, do these data provide convincing evidence of, or something to that extent, in which case that's a trigger to do the four-step process with a significance test. If it wants students to interpret the p-value, it'll say, interpret the p-value. If it wants them to interpret the confidence level, it'll say, interpret the confidence level, or maybe something like, what does it mean to be 95% confident in this context?